Yeah, we lost some time early in the campaign, 4 months to be exact, fulfilling my pledge to walk the state. I don't regret it. But perhaps here in a state like Montana, I would have been better off driving or even flying the state. But I learned from my mistakes, and one thing I do know is that I'll be back in 2 years. And next time, we'll be the ones with 86%, and Mr. Trimble will be the one with 6%.
Well, there you have it, a concession speech from Dennis V. Hunkler, but perhaps a ray of hope for the future. This has been Lorraine Newman, live from New York. It's Saturday night.
Hello and welcome to the Not Ready for Primetime Project. We're Gary Seath and Brad Robinson.
And you're not.
This week, we're talking about the early years of SNL. Season 4, Episode 5, with host Buck Henry and musical guest The Grateful Dead. This show originally aired on November 11th, 1978. Brad?
Hello?
Buck Henry could only mean one thing.
Can only mean one thing. Once again, welcome. Hey, man, you're not John. Oh. Apparently, John Snyder is not available, and Bill Kenney is stepping in for him this week. Hi, Bill.
Hey, I'm the Fred Willard to John's Muhammad Ali, I guess, right? I mean, this is... I'm so excited to be here. Buck is one of my favorites as well, and I feel like I'm here to talk about a legend and, filling in for a legend in John Schneider.
Okay, easy on the Schneider talk. Enough. This is about you, Bill. You are the guest this week.
Listen.
Yeah. You're our Muhammad Ali, Bill.
Oh, I appreciate that.
So, Bill, we've done obviously 6 of these Buck shows already, but you just said you're a Buck fan. What made you a Buck fan? Was it all of his appearances on SNL?
Yeah, I mean, I was aware of Get Smart, of course, even as a teenager. So I knew he was involved with that. I was probably a little bit older when I knew about The Graduate. But going back and watching the original era and seeing Buck come in. And he was one of the few people I really didn't know when I started watching the original era of SNL. Even in the 80s, he was kind of a non-entity outside of SNL. Right. So, being able to go back and watch those and just be amazed as a teenager of how good this guy was when he came on to host and how everything just kind of flowed so well in every episode. He made me a fan pretty early on.
I think it's very easy to become a fan of Buck watching these episodes because, like you said, it's pretty seamless and everyone is just on board. And at this point in the season now, we talked about it last week with the Steve Martin episode. The first 3 episodes were kind of rough. And now they're in a point where it's like Steve Martin, Buck Henry kind of righting the ship.
Righting the ship, yeah.
Yeah, you could just see the ease with the cast and everyone's kind of way more comfortable than they were earlier this season, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it is pretty choppy early on. I've been listening, of course, to you guys over the course of the last few weeks. And, the Fred Willard episode is one of my favorites just because I love Fred. And you guys talked about that so well with, how he was kind of an unknown at that time as well. And then getting into Zappa and that was just bonkers. I mean, we're about to start a really great run in season 4 with, as you said, Steve, Buck, and then next week with Carrie Fisher. So one of my favorite runs of the history of the show.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And Brad, seeing a band like the Grateful Dead now on the show and coming and just the reaction that they got from the audience even that was a huge reaction.
Huge reaction. I've actually read a couple of places where Lorne was upset because I think this is an instance where the band got people in. He was upset on how many people were there to maybe just see the band and not the actual show, because you're right. The band gets an amazing response both times when they come on this episode.
Even just in the opening credits.
Yeah.
They mention the Grateful Dead and the crowd goes crazy. That's a good point.
Yep.
Jerry Berry's in the building, man. I mean, of course they're going to go crazy.
And it's funny because the Grateful Dead, I think at this point, we were talking about, being a known entity, and they were definitely known, but they hadn't kind of broken through yet, right? That's my understanding.
Yeah. I mean, they kind of were always just under the surface, right? They never really broke. I guess they did kind of in the mid 80s by then, but they were always that band like everybody knew of. and kind of listened to, but they never hit that chart-topping success or number one albums. But everybody knew who the Grateful Dead were.
Yeah, I think this is one of the more interesting runs in the music of SNL, because after the Stones, you really don't have a band that plays a top 40 hit. I mean, you do have the Blues Brothers soon, but it almost goes from the Stones to Doobie Brothers, where it's just kind of all these under the radar bands that, Zappa, Devo before they were big, so it is an interesting time to be a musical guest on SNL.
And they deliver. They deliver, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As does Buck. I thought Buck delivered too.
I think Buck was great. Should we just get into it?
We should. I like this one. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
So this show opens at the Hunkler headquarters with Lorraine reporting on the loss of, what was it, a senatorial candidate or congressional candidate, Dennis V. Hunkler.
You're having about as much trouble as Lorraine had.
Oh, that's why I was transcribing this sketch. Basically, what we see then is a concession speech. Bill comes on as this candidate, Dennis V. Hunkler, and gives his concession speech talking about all of the things that they didn't do right in his campaign. One of them was something that Lorraine explained about his wife marrying. I kind of lost track there.
He left his wife for like a teenage girlfriend. And then when he comes up, he talks about perhaps let's raise property taxes sky high was not the best theme for a campaign in 1978.
Right. Yeah. So this was very, I don't know if disjointed. I was thinking this was something real, but then realizing like, oh no, this is not a real candidate that they're making fun of. They're just making fun of the whole concession speech thing that happened that week, because this is right after the election in 1978. But yeah, I thought it was a little confusing for me watching it in 2024 because I wasn't sure what the hell was going on.
A little long too, I will say. It kind of, it's him giving this concession speech, and he gives his speech, and then he reads the telegram that he sent to the winner, which was basically the speech he just gave word for word.
Yes.
And it's a little strange to see so much of the cast not have anything to say. I mean, outside of Lorraine and Bill, you got Garrett, you got Gilda, and you've got Jane, and none of them say a word. They're just kind of there as almost like extras.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is not something that Bill did a lot of. I mean, outside of Ted Kennedy, he really doesn't do a lot of politicians on the show. And Bill did have some good lines. I mean, talking about punching Coretta King in the stomach because he didn't recognize her and he was having a bad day.
Yeah.
I mean, he did get some Jim Downey-esque lines out there. So
I thought that same thing. It felt very Jim Downey to me, the whole thing.
Yeah.
It was also strange to see Lorraine reporting the news, but not with Weekend Updates. So not doing her reporter voice the whole time. And like you said, Brad, she kind of stumbled a little bit. It was kind of uncharacteristic for Lorraine, I thought.
Yeah, she stumbled and then kind of got back on track, but then it came back to her again and she was still having issues. So I don't know. But she did get her a solo live from New York, which I think is only the second time she's had a solo one. So that was good to see.
Well, we get the opening credits then, and Brad, I just wanted to point out that I mentioned the Grateful Dead got a huge reaction, but they also got an Edie Baskin photo, which we haven't seen of a band that wasn't hosting yet this year.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I'm looking, I had in my notes here too. Yeah, it's got a huge reaction. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Then we get Buck's monologue, which is I want to call it a typical Buck monologue because it is something we've seen before with Buck, where he comes on and gives a genuine monologue to the crowd. And the whole time they have the Chiron crawl comes up and they reference it right away. Like, in the crawl, they mention that they usually do this when Buck hosts. And this was a very long crawl. And before we talk about the crawl, I just want to say how good Buck is at not missing a beat in in the lines he's delivering.
Amazing.
I wrote it down not once, but twice. God damn, he is good at this. He is so good at this.
At some point I didn't watch it and was listening to him because it's just vamping.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't make any sense if you listen to it on its own, but he is so beat by beat, hits every mark on this. It's so great.
This is the one I noticed the most where he hits those beats so perfectly.
He knows when the laughs are coming from the crawl and he gives it a beat at that right moment or references it. It's really good. But the crawl itself was funny as well, which isn't always, to be honest. But this one I thought really worked because they talked about how everyone was tired from Steve because they put so much work into Steve's episode last week. And next week's Carrie Fisher, and they're very excited. And Buck, what did they say? Buck, it's like somewhere between not having a show.
A Buck Henry show is sort of midway between a show and a week off.
Right.
Yes, that's right.
Which in some ways I think of as a compliment for Buck because it's probably true on the writing end because he can help punch things up. But also the way that they're contextualizing this is just taking shots at Buck the whole time.
Yeah.
And it totally works juxtaposed to his vamping, like you said, Bill.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And I mean, that Star Wars clip is fantastic. And the fact that they talk about having seen it 6 times, I mean, we're all of the same age where that was a badge of honor, right? When we were kids, like pre-VCR, pre-streaming, you talking about how many times you saw the original Star Wars was,
right,
something that you bragged about to your friends and you are always competing. So I love that line. I love that. Even it's only a year later and they're like, it still holds up. What are you talking about? Yeah. Of course it holds up.
It's funny. And they're like, a number of our writers have seen have seen Star Wars 6 times this week. Like, they're just totally checked out on Buck being there. And they talk about, Carrie Fisher's hosting next week. So we have ideas and they start basically pitching the audience on ideas. What is it? Star Whores? Where Carrie Fisher plays a hooker. Yeah. Star Boars.
Actually, that'd be a nice one for Buck.
Yeah. That would have been good.
They're like, Star Wars. Actually, that's a good one for Buck.
That's right. And then they showed the clips of Star Wars, which was just hilarious to cut away to.
I love that they went meta for this right away. Like, we saw the crawl and I got excited. Yeah. And then the fact that they went meta and just called out that they're doing another crawl was really fun. And then, Steve Martin jokes were great. They're talking about last week's host, next week's host, everybody other than Buck, other than to knock him down. Right. It was just so funny. And I just can't say enough just how good he is. Oh my God.
Yeah.
He's so good at this.
Yeah, it's really good. And it's not completely untrue where, I mean, he is still not as well known. I mean, you've got Steve Martin, who's the biggest comedy star in the world at that point, and Carrie Fisher, who's coming off the biggest movie in the world.
Right.
Like, it's a joke, but it's not, it's pretty interesting to kind of put that in there for him.
Yeah.
He's probably the most well-known he has been when hosting the show, because his movie Heaven Can Wait came out that summer. It was a pretty big success. It gets nominated for a lot of Oscars. So last time he hosted, it hadn't come out yet. It came out over the summer. So I agree with you, Bill. Like, he's never one of the people like as a big name, but I feel like this is probably the biggest he'll be in these 5 seasons.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Well, Buck's really good at the monologues, and Dan is really good at pitching. And so we go to a live commercial of Dan pitching Ravco's Chinch Ranch, where you could raise chinchillas in your house to make your own fur coats. And it's typical Dan pitchman 2 camera talking about, fur coats and how expensive they are. And then you go to Bill and Lorraine at home demonstrating with a live chinchilla
out of his 3-story apartment suite.
Yes. Yeah, that comes with the kit. And they put it in the what is it? The Chinch King 2000 or something, I think. And so you don't have to skin the chinchilla yourself. And then there's 2 exits, and one is the fur, and then the other is just ground meat that comes out.
And for the limited time of this TV offer only, we've been allowed to reveal this additional professional secret. Chinchilla meat is ADIA approved for human consumption.
Wow, that's great chinch.
This chinch tastes like chicken. The Ravco Chinch Ranch Home Chinchilla Breeding Kit, now only $89.95. That's $89.95. Order now and receive 2 free booklets, 100 chinchilla fur patterns, and 20 ways to prepare and serve chinch. It's a cinch to ranch chinch with Ravco.
I thought this was a lot of fun, especially for a live commercial, which sometimes don't hit, but this one I thought really did.
Yeah, and to get into the minutia of it, I mean, Dan does this so many times with these Ravco products, but this is the only time he uses a name, Lane Breather, which is crazy. Yeah. Like, to think about all the other times before and after that he does this. It's the only time and you assume it's the same character, right? So, and then Lorraine has that great line, just kind of referencing all the way to Bassamak. That's great chinch.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, as soon as you saw Lorraine at all, you're waiting for that line to come up. You know it's coming.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, I thought this was great. A really fun way to keep the fun going, I thought.
Yeah.
I liked it. The problem is Dan, as you said, is so great at these. And so for me, I didn't think this was Dan's best. And I think it was an energy thing. He kind of felt a little bit restrained more so than before. So because all the other ones are just so amazing, like this is not bad at all, but he has to live up to such a high bar. I didn't love it as much as other ones. Like the last one we saw, which I think was Mohawk Master from like the OJ episode last season. That's the other thing too. We haven't seen a Ravco in quite a bit. So it was really fun to see again. I just definitely did notice Dan's energy felt a little bit pulled back and made me like not love it as much as I wanted to.
I thought that was because they went to the demo with Bill in the Rain longer than, usually like Dan does the pitch and then at the end you go to the payoff. But with this, it was kind of mid pitch of what he was, going through. And then they go to Bill in the Rain. So it wasn't all on him.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe.
Yeah.
Because he does turn it back up a little bit at the end for the sign off. He gets it back. That energy comes back a little bit, but it's very good.
Definitely.
And Bill and Lorraine are great. Like it's a fun concept. Like it's all there.
Yeah, I love this one as well. I think I had that written down too, that Dan is very understated, but yeah, it still holds up very well.
Well, it's a Buck Henry episode. We still get a samurai bit.
Bring it on.
Samurai optometrist.
Oh, yeah. See, even the name's funny. It's hilarious.
I mean, this is again, it's another typical Buck and Samurai sketch where Buck comes in needing to replace his reading glasses and goes through everything with John as the samurai.
Yeah, I never really get tired of these because outside of other ones that they did, recurring characters in this era, I don't think they push this down our throat too much. I mean, this is the 13th time. So, I mean,
not too much, just 13.
Just Chris Christopherson or O.J. Simpson, but whatever. Regardless of those other ones.
Okay, fair.
Saturday Night Samurai. Sure.
I mean, when you think about when they went back and 3, 4, 5 episodes in a row with some of these characters, like to have this only on average 3 times a year is not terrible. But yeah. There's nobody better than Buck with John in this. I mean, this is up there with some of the best duos in the history of the show.
Bill, what did you think about the response John gets? Everybody knows what the sketch is. It starts with Buck. Buck walks in the door, and they cut and they announce Samurai Optician, and the place goes nuts.
They go crazy.
But what did you think? I wanted to ask what you thought of that.
I think, we're, as you guys have talked about already, he's one of the biggest stars in the world too at this point because of Animal House. So he's getting that recognition. He hasn't had an awful lot to do the first few weeks. So to have Samurai come back and have his piece where he's the main focus, I think that was the reason why you get this audience just going crazy for this man.
What'd you think, Gary? You like the sketch?
I did. Yeah, I thought there were a few funny things, like when he tells him it's going to cost an arm and a leg, and John just like does that. I thought that was funny. I thought it was funny they both went into like humming "Shattered" by the Rolling Stones, which we just heard poorly done by the Rolling Stones.
Yeah, how many people are going to sing the Rolling Stones this year?
That's true. That's true. Yeah, but I thought it was really good. No one interacts with the samurai better than Buck Henry, and so it's just great every time. It did catch me, though, at the end when they go to the freeze frame. John was very careful not to hit Buck in the face with the sword. He kind of went very slowly and gingerly into that.
I agree. I noted, too. That was really fun, especially given the history of Buck getting injured before. Yeah, I like that. It was a fun way to end that sketch.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff here. I think him miming the sex act when he's talking about having to lay in bed with his wife and not be able to do the crossword puzzle, and then pretending he's a blind man when Buck can't read the eye chart is great. This is just typical wonderful John.
Yeah.
As you said, Bill, they play off each other so well. My favorite moment of this is when Buck turns around to do the eye chart and John gives him the instructions and he puts his hand over his one eye and Buck's like, okay. And then he turns around and he says, which eye? Just that little side comment. It's just, it's so natural, but it worked so well. It's so great. It's classic Buck.
It's really great. Yeah.
Yeah. It was very good sketch.
So I felt I made this note a lot this episode. Some of you guys think this is another one. It starts to feel long. And I found myself saying that a lot of sketches tonight. They felt like really long sketches. And I don't mean it good or bad, but just felt like a lot of these sketches just were meaty.
I didn't feel it in a bad way with this one.
Mm-hmm.
There were some others that I did, but I thought this one, because I enjoyed the interaction between the two of them, it worked for me.
Yeah, there may have been a beat or two too many in this one, but yeah, as Gary says, I think for this sketch, it doesn't bother me that much.
Okay, because this is the one where they go and he pulls the tortoiseshell out and start. That's where I was like, okay, it's maybe this is where it's going on a little bit too long. You know where it's going, but it's like, oh.
Yeah.
But to your point, Bill, yeah, John hasn't had a lot to do. Gary, I'm going to say it. I think this is John's best sketch of the season so far.
Low bar.
Fine. Knock him down. It only took 5 episodes to get there. But I think this is his best sketch.
For John, yes, I think it is one of the best of the season. All right. Now, the next sketch is one that I'm just going to say it up front. It's a sketch. It's a character that I've never really liked. It's always made me a little uncomfortable. It is the first time we see Uncle Roy. This was a sketch, Brad, that I thought went too long. But I also know, like I just said, that I've never really liked this character. I think my favorite part about this was when they referenced going to see that new comedian in Foul Play.
A nice Chevy dig in season 4 still. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what? It didn't feel long to me only because we hadn't seen this character yet. And since you're establishing kind of this world, I didn't mind this going a little long. I agree with you. Again, it's a longer sketch, but it never felt long to me because it's the first time we're seeing Uncle Roy in this setting.
Oh, come on, Uncle Roy, let's play some more. Yeah. Uncle Roy,
Yeah.
how come you never got married and had babies?
I don't know, Tracy. Sometimes I think the woman I'm going to marry hasn't been born yet. Or maybe just in the last few years. Anyway, your mommy and daddy are going to be home soon, so scoot along, the two of you. Get on up to bed.
I don't want to. I'm not sleepy.
No, don't worry. Uncle Roy will be back next week, and we can all give Ruffy a nice tick bath.
Oh, yeah, okay. Good night, Uncle Roy. Good night.
SNL has a history of sketches that don't age well from all eras. This is probably the biggest culprit of this era is Uncle Roy. It's a Rosie Schuster and Beats piece. They've continued to defend it up until recently. Buck was interviewed 10, 12 years ago before he passed, defending it. Buck's idea is that, the characters have, genuine feelings for each other. It's he tries to explain why he stands by it. Rosie has defended it as an idea of it was all like crimes in their mind. Like, Buck doesn't actually do anything to the girls. And, nothing actually ever happens to anybody. So, the people involved have all kind of stood by this sketch. That all of it aside, like, I don't know. I don't love it, but I don't love it because of like the bad taste or anything. I just think it's not the greatest sketch in the world, but I do like seeing Buck. This is another instance, I think, of Buck's probably the only person that could pull this off. Buck has that personality we've talked about so many times. So, yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Bill?
I like these, and especially the first one. And I think you talk about it not aging well. I don't know that it was aging well even in 1978. You can hear the uncomfortableness in the audience. They're not sure if they should be laughing at these jokes. That we're at the height of stranger danger and what's happening in families and things like that. So they almost don't want to laugh at any of this even then. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a great commentary. I forget which one it is where they kind of wrap it up. Maybe it's the third one where they're kind of like, I could be. How does he say it? I could be in your family too, or something. He
breaks
that.
The wall, right, and turns to camera.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think the commentary after you see the trilogy of these kind of puts it all together for me. But as far as being funny, I think it is. I think it's got some really good moments in it.
Gary's waiting for some examples.
I was just going to say, I was just about to say, such as.
Yeah, Gary's look was, go on.
Okay, well, I think when they're spanking Buck, I think that's a really funny moment when he's pretending to be the dog and they're just kind of hitting him on the ass. And, they kind of turn the tables on it where he's the one being touched as opposed to, as you said, Brad, it's never about what happens. It's just kind of, and I think that's where the defense comes from, where they're like, well, nothing actually happens. The only one that's really being touched is Buck.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. That's,
I know that
Gary's looking at me quizzically.
No. This is not a judgment on you at all, Bill. Please don't take it that way.
No, I'm not.
No, and Bill makes a good point too of the timeliness of what was happening when this went on. Rosie told a story too that they actually talked about at one point debating whether or not to put like a PSA kind of commentary on the end of this sketch. Like, we know it's bad. We know this isn't the right thing to be doing. And they ended up opting to go out of it, because they thought it was kind of a cop out. So it's, to Bill's point, like they knew what they were doing at the time. And I guess it's one of those things too. You need to think about the time of when the sketch is coming and what they're writing about, because they are trying to hit on things and straddle that line of like, acceptable, non-acceptable, and what you can make fun of and what you can't. Because I think they've gone on to say too that the real commentary here, or joke, isn't supposed to be Buck and his relationship with the girls. It's the parents and how blind they are to where they're putting their kids, because that's kind of what was happening at this time. These parents were just, leaving their kids with random people that they thought they knew, and what was really happening. And I've heard Rosie talk about that's where they were trying to go with this, as far as like the commentary of this sketch, and not so much that, the Uncle Roy character is an acceptable character in real life.
And I think there's something to be said for taking a risk. We don't see this in modern SNL very often, obviously not in this regard, but in any regard where they kind of look outside the box. Closest you could even come to is Sarah Squirm at this point. And even that, they mute her so much. So I love seeing the show take chances. Now, again, something could be said for the fact that they do bring this back 3 times. Is that necessary? Probably not. But yeah, I love the chance they take on this. So even though it's uncomfortable and it may not be the most laughs you're going to get all night, I like what they tried to do here.
It's another good point too. I mean, they bring it back. They bring it back 2 more times. So Buck obviously liked it. The cast enjoyed doing it with them. The writers liked writing for this character. So it's very easy, I think, now to look back and knock it for things, not taking out your part, Gary. I mean, if you don't like it, you don't like it. I mean, there's comedy bits everyone likes and does not like. So, but as far as like a tastefulness or like appropriateness thing of it, I mean, I don't dislike it because of that. I like watching Buck and other things more, but I did enjoy the sketch. I thought it was pretty fun.
All right. Well, the next bit I don't think was controversial at all, because the Grateful Dead comes on and performs Casey Jones to a very excited audience.
We're so into this song.
And it's great. I mean, Casey Jones was an older song, right? This came out a while ago. This isn't a new song that they're playing.
Yeah, it's like 7-8 years old at this point now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably their most famous song, right?
Yeah, it's definitely one of them. Yeah, it probably is one of the most famous song. And I just thought it was fun watching them perform in the late 70s. I thought it was great.
It's similar, like we saw the band, the Kinks. You're just watching a really great band perform at the height of their abilities.
Yeah, to get a band of this stature, again, even if they're not as well known as they would become, they were in that underground hippie vibe for about a decade at this point, maybe a little bit longer. So while we haven't maybe reached the point where people are following them on the road in the 80s and the early 90s before Garcia passed, I think we're, as you hear from the audience, everybody's into this at this point.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great performance of a great song. This is another one that made it onto the SNL 25 when they did the music compilation CDs. This song's on there. It's just so good. I think this is another instance of a band. I mean, they're popular, but a band having to fight to get on, or people fight to get them on. Franken and Davis had been fighting since year one. They wanted to get the Grateful Dead on. So now they finally got them on. And at this point, too, the band had kind of decently strong ties to the show at this point. John had been a friend of the band. They've talked about kind of the deciding factor of them wanting to come on is John was friends with both the drummers, and they wanted to go on the show and hang out with him. He'd been on stage with the Grateful Dead at this point a couple times. There's a sketch last season, the Art Garfunkel sketch where John's playing the bouncer and Art and everybody's trying to get in to see Kiss. They named the character of John's doorman as the guy who mans the door for the Grateful Dead, this guy, Steve Parrish. So it's like, Frank and Davis, big fans. John's become a fan of them. The Blues Brothers will go on to open for the Grateful Dead this New Year's Eve at Winterland. So there's definitely a lot of connection there. And I think it's another reason why I think this episode just works so well. It's like I don't know, to me, there's an energy of this episode that I think is just really high, of like everybody wanting to be there and be together and put forth really great stuff. And I just, throughout the entire episode, this is another instance, it's like great band, great performance, audience is totally into it. You're just jazzed watching it.
Really high, Brad? I see what you did there.
He didn't see what he did there, Bill. So
No.
Kudos to you.
Thank you for pointing that out.
I think that energy, though, Brad, comes from you mentioned that a lot of people were there to see the band, right?
Yeah.
And maybe Lauren didn't like that, but I feel like having an audience who is into seeing the band kind of forces you to put on better comedy. And when it works, it really works. Whatever's getting people in the door, then it kind of like forces you to up your game, in my opinion.
It should. I agree with you. It should. I mean,
yeah,
we talked about the Rolling Stones didn't happen, but no, I agree. You're right. All of that should lead to everybody upping their game. Totally.
And I think Buck is a big part of that too, where the cast and the writers feel comfortable with him so they can do all of these things. They didn't have the leeway with the Rolling Stones to do anything funny, apparently.
It's also different, I think, Buck versus Steve. We just saw Steve Martin last week, and I feel like, I was trying to figure out how to say it, but it's like, I feel like the cast and everybody on the show tries harder for Buck or with Buck. Like Steve's one of them. And it's more like we're all in this together and let's do it together, like as a group. But because Buck's who he is and he's older, obviously, I feel like there's just this, again, of the energy of it all where we have to do something good for Buck. Like we need to do this for him and put on a good show because of it. And I think it just carries over to all the sketches. And that's why I think I really like this episode so much.
Yeah. He definitely brings something to it every time. Well, he doesn't bring anything to Weekend Update, but that's not his fault. It's brought to us this week by Chafe Boyardee. And we just roll into Weekend Update. I don't think many of the first jokes really hit for me. There were some peace talk jokes, an Elton John joke that fell flat, I thought.
That was not good.
That does not age well.
No. Census.
I like the census joke. That was decent.
Yeah. That was okay. I think we get one of our most famous celebrity corners where Bill interviews Liz Taylor, whose husband was just in a Senate race, and it's John eating a chicken leg. This is one of the classic, I think, celebrity corners, right?
Yeah, this is one of those that we would see in clip shows all the time, right? When they would show John, especially, I don't know if it was on his best of, but I think it was.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I mean, this is just one of those that you constantly saw throughout the 80s and the 90s. In reruns and things like that. And it's an interesting story with John Warner. He had lost this primary, and then the guy he was running against died in a plane crash. So he ended up winning and becoming a senator for 30 years. So that's kind of the backstory behind the whole Liz thing, which I find fascinating. I love the politics of it.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's funny. I was going back and forth when I was watching this, and as it started, I was like, why is this always on the John Belushi best of or memorials? I think it's almost more for Bill than it is for him. Bill is really good in this. This is a great showcase of John and Bill together. And I think that's one of the reasons why you see it so much, because there's not a lot of good examples of Bill Murray behind the update desk. So this is one of those. But take away the drag of it all. John's physical comedy is really good.
I also like his subtleness in this when it's not very much, but there is that moment where Bill is gushing over him, over her. And I loved you in all these old movies. And John just looks up and just goes back to eating the chicken.
Yeah.
That's just one of those moments when Belushi's so boisterous and loud most of the time, to have that just kind of second of subtleness. I really enjoy that.
Yeah. Then we go back to Bill at the desk, and he does a a Jimmy Hoffa thumb joke. And you can see him like shuffling in his jacket to pull something out right before he says it. I know it wasn't a great joke, probably. I enjoyed it coming from Bill.
I mean, even Bill knew this one was weak. At the end, when he puts his hand back in the pocket, he looks at the cat. Like, even Bill was like, I can't believe we just did that.
I don't know. I kind of like the joke where he's picking up an extremely short hitchhiker.
Yeah, I did enjoy that. Yeah.
This update is so entrenched in 1978 between the Pope jokes and the Jimmy Hoffa jokes. It's just way, way in the weeds here.
Seattle Slew joke comes up after that.
Right? Yeah.
Point counterpoint stays right in the ballpark.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then point counterpoint, we have Dan comes on again. He seemed a little grayer this time, like they had more time for his makeup as station manager, and they did point counterpoint with the Shaw. And this time Jane starts off with, I know you're going to say, Jane, you ignorant slut, which I thought was really funny, and it forces him to call her something else.
Jane, you poor misguided scrag.
Misguided scrag, yes. It's interesting to see, we've seen these duo Weekend Update hosts for so long now, for almost 25 years in modern times. And it's interesting to see that they can't really seem to get a handle on what they're doing. You know, they have Bill in and then he disappears and Bill's really only there to do Celebrity Corner and a couple jokes. And you guys mentioned this a couple weeks ago too. And, then you bring Dan in and it's just kind of all over the place. So I think it kind of loses something in that they haven't really figured out how to do that. And I know that I don't think they ever really do. I think Jane and Bill get better doing this together. But there's something really off about Weekend Update at this point in season 4.
Well, they did themselves no favors with starting Bill as the stargazer character, because this is kind of the first one I really felt he took away from it and tried playing it straight the whole time. And I think he also got, this is the most he's done from the desk so far this season. I mean, I know we're only 5 episodes in, but this is definitely more of a Bill Murray presence on the desk. So they're just still like you said, Bill, they're still working it out. It just takes a very long time, and you might be right. They might never actually kind of really nail it down.
Yeah.
It still feels unnecessary to me. It still would be better, in my opinion, to just have Jane at the desk and bring other people on. Have Bill come on every week and do a Celebrity Corner if you want, but he doesn't need to co-host it.
How great is Jane?
Real quick on the point counterpoint, what I enjoy about it is Jane was so focused reading her cue cards this week.
Yeah.
It kind of feels like she's trying to keep up with Dan in the speed with which she talks and without missing a beat. And it just feels like the back and forth with that really, I just noticed it because she was staring so intently at her cue cards. Yeah, it was fun. Well, after this, we get the show Great Performances, hosted by Jean Marsh, played by Lorraine. And this week she's talking about the performance of Rasputin, played by Stephen Buscakis.
Steve Buscakis is back.
Steve's back.
So they do a scene from this Rasputin play that she sets up, and it is Steve. Nope. And it is John playing Steve Buscakis.
Playing Rasputin.
Playing Rasputin. Right. Thank you. And then Buck and Dan and Gilda are trying to kill Rasputin in a number of different ways throughout this whole thing, and they constantly fail. I thought John playing Rasputin was just kind of right on for casting.
Yeah.
Or Steve Buscakis.
No, or Steve Buscakis. Well, I mean, Tom Davis did write this for John. He's talked about he wrote the sketch for John to play Rasputin, so it does make sense, yeah.
I think John must have skipped dinner, because between the Liz part and the Rasputin, like, he is just chowing down.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. They give him a tray of cookies that are poisoned, and they're like, oh, that will definitely kill him. And then they cut back to John and the tray of cookies is gone. But the next shot, they go to a wide shot and you see all of the cookies on the floor. It was like, there was no better way to get the cookies off the set.
I didn't notice the cookies on the floor because all I noticed was the coffee table. And when John stood up, I'm like, he's going to Farley into the coffee table, isn't he?
Yes, he did.
Sure enough, just face plants right in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Somewhere a 10-year-old Farley is watching this going, I could do that.
I could do
Exactly.
that. Yeah, this I don't know. I go back and forth on how I feel about this one. I mean, there's just not a lot of escalation. Like the fact that they're changing weapons doesn't really do it for me. Like, first miss of the night, in my opinion.
I like Buck. Like, I really like Buck in this sketch. Like, he's really good as the servant who's like always like has the line after Rasputin dies. I enjoyed watching Buck in this sketch.
Yeah, and Gilda kind of is distracting, which is strange because Gilda is usually so great, but her screaming kind of jars me and takes me out of the comedy of it all.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that's what they were going for, but it felt very strange to see her just constantly screaming as they're trying to kill Rasputin.
Yeah. I agree with you, Brett. I enjoyed Buck. I enjoyed John as like he didn't do much, right?
No, but he's fine. Yeah.
He's fine. I think it was just the repetitive. I don't even know that it was a joke, right? It's like, you know, all of these stories of Rasputin famously not dying, and that's all it was. So I wasn't really, it was strange to me, the whole premise.
If this was a sketch with another host, I think we'd just be complaining about it. But there's something about Buck and watching Buck. Like, that's the one thing I took away from this sketch was I enjoyed watching Buck. And I feel like he always gets one of those subpar sketches, but he manages to do something to make it enjoyable.
Yeah, I think that's probably why I went back and forth on this, like trying to decide whether or not I liked it, because Buck does elevate it more than almost anybody else could.
I did like the very end when they go to Lorraine and she sums it up and then she shows a scene from the next episode. And he's got like Dan's holding like an axe through his head and Buck's got a crossbow or something. Gilda's, I think, eating his foot or something.
Gilda's chewing his leg. Yeah.
I did like that little cutaway to end it. I thought it was a fun return to end the scene.
And having Lorraine host something is fantastic too. I mean,
it's always good.
At this point where we're not seeing her as much as we should be.
Yeah.
I do like that.
Yeah.
Is Garrett still in this episode?
Well, we see Garrett in the next sketch. He plays the bartender at the Sands Lounge.
Look at me setting up a segue.
Let's not pretend like you did that on purpose.
No, I legitimately was wondering if we had seen Garrett.
We get another Nick the Lounge singer in the Strip North. We get him talking to John. And who's that with John?
That's the drummer from the Dead. That's Bill Kruzman.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
For years, I thought that was Brian Doyle Murray.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He's way too big to be Brian Doyle Murray.
Yeah.
It's funny because at first I thought it was Jim Downey, and then I was like, that's not Jim Downey, but I wasn't sure who it was. He stays with them a long time.
Yeah.
And then he does some banter with Lorraine and Gilda and Buck, which was more horny Buck.
More horny Buck, but no speaking Buck.
No, because he was busy kissing the women when they weren't talking. Buck was fondling them and kissing them. That's why. He was fine with no lines, Bill.
Yeah.
He was fine with it.
Buck's like, they're of age in this sketch. I'm all good. Don't worry. I don't need it. Figure out a way to get Jimmy Joe Red Sky in this sketch. I'm fine back here.
Yeah. Dan comes on as Jimmy Joe Red Sky.
I was wondering how the hell they were going to shoehorn this in.
This was not the strongest Nick the Lounge Singer sketch, but it wasn't horrible, I didn't think.
I thought it wasn't bad, but this is where I noticed there was a certain energy to this sketch. And granted, a lot of that's Bill, but there was something about this sketch where it's not great, but I enjoyed it. It was fun. It had some funny moments. Paul Schaefer, of course, steals the show, or he's just, shut your mouth when he's doing the Shaft song. And then, of course, Bill calls Garrett Shaft, go figure.
Yeah.
When he goes to get a drink. Yeah, again, sketch felt a little long. You mentioned Gary, especially he goes all that back and forth with Bill and John. But I don't know. This is the sketch where I wrote the note down. We talked about it earlier, where it felt like they were all in this. Like the cast was trying to make a great episode for Buck. And it's at this point in the show is when I made the note. It's like, yeah, it's not a great sketch. We've seen it before, but Bill's selling it. Garrett's good. The girls, like everybody's doing what they can to give Buck a good show. I felt it here is where I really started to notice it.
Yeah, I like the ending to this because I think it's one of the few times we see Bill as Nick kind of step out of the charming host of the night and just start screaming at these people to get out because he's the majority owner in this off-strip bar and they don't want to lose their liquor license. So the fact that he's screaming as he's singing behind closed doors, I love that part.
Yeah. Did you guys notice that Bill and Dan broke a little bit when they were talking.
Yeah,
That
just
was
a
great.
little.
Yes.
Yeah,
Just a little bit.
just
Like
a little.
Bill more than Dan, but Dan paused for a second when he was like, when he was about to.
It's like
crack. It
Dan
was
tried
funny.
to set him up, and he's like, "Oh wait, it worked." And this did have kind of a difference where there was a little bit of a story behind this sketch. Like normally, it's Nick as a hired gun somewhere, and this is the story of it's him and Garrett and Paul Schaefer and Jimmy Joe Red Sky.
Dan.
They all
Yeah.
own it, right? They're 4 owners, and
Yeah. They're 200 feet from the line where they couldn't be open all night.
Yeah.
so they've got to
Yeah.
close at 11. So get out.
Yeah.
And kudos to Garrett and Ann Beats, just kind of in that background role for most of the sketch. Just, I mean, the conversation they appear to be having throughout the entire time, they really sell it. I love that part of it, and getting to see Garrett. I mean, even though he didn't have a lot to say, he is saying a lot without the sound on.
Yeah. It was fun. Well, I guess our next recurring character is Joan Face.
Yes.
Who we see hosting More Flu to Worry About.
Can never get enough Joan Face.
Jane, as Joan Face, is hosting More Flu to Worry About with her guest, Dr. Ike Bodanza, played by Buck. And they're just talking about flus. Yep, that's it.
Yep.
I was wondering if I wrote anything more than that. I did not. The only other thing I wrote down was this was a very Buck-like sketch to me.
I agree. I don't know if this was Downey and Beats because they wrote the More Insects to Worry About sketches from
I think it
before.
was Schuster, Downey and Schuster.
Downey and Schuster. Okay. I have a theory on why we have this sketch, Gary. Buck and Jane are so good together.
Yeah.
And this is the only instance of the night where we see that. We kind of got it a little bit in Uncle Roy, but not really. But like a true like Buck and Jane one-on-one kind of thing. They're so good. And I feel like they thought this might be a good example to do that. Have Buck and Jane in a sketch by themselves.
Well, Buck and Jane in a talk show setting is, kind of standard. It's par for the course, right? So that part I got. The whole flu thing was what kind of threw me for a loop where I was like, what? Why? What is this? Why are we talking about this? I didn't get that.
I mean, you're not the only one. I mean, this sketch did not get many laughs. It got a couple chuckles at best.
Yeah.
Are we at the height of concern about swine flu? Is that probably the basis for this? I'm not sure if the timeline matches up, but I think it is.
They mentioned it, didn't they? Because she's like, the whole reason there's like 4 different kinds of flus and they end up on the toad flu, right? I think they mentioned swine flu.
Right. Yeah. 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 I mean, the jokes don't really land here, but I mean, this is probably the best example of the night of Buck being the quintessential host. He really tries to sell this as the smarmy guy who really wants people to die from all of these terrible flus. Don't bring that weak flu. And you're talking to Buck's character. And I mean, their interaction is really great in this. But I mean, there's a couple of good throwaway lines, but overall, it just
Le Petite Colonne. When he talks about the small intestines, they call it Le Petite Colonne.
I like the ideal host, and I'd still say Johnny Carson. I like that line, but
Yes. Yeah.
And I still think there's an energy. Like for a sketch of just 2 people sitting and talking, I do think there's still a little bit of energy to this sketch with the 2 of them. I think it's why I like it more than it actually is good, is I just enjoyed watching Buck and Jane. And I think there's this energy I keep saying I feel throughout the episode. I think I still feel it in this sketch.
Yeah, they really do try to sell it. So I can appreciate that part of it. But yeah, the jokes. Again, I mean...
Gary's not buying my story.
No, I mean, look, I think Jane and Buck, we've seen it 6 times now that they work really well together. So putting them in a sketch is not so crazy.
Yeah.
To me, it's just like this was, I think, a good performance, but the writing was not there.
Yeah.
But the energy stays up, like you were saying, Brad, because we get the Grateful Dead back for not 1, but 2 songs. They perform I Need a Miracle and Good Lovin'. I thought they were really good.
Totally. Yeah, another great performance.
Yeah, very good. And getting to see all 3 of the lead singers in different songs was really great.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, these songs were on the album that came out, I think earlier that week. Shakedown Street was their new album. Good Lovin', gets released, I think, a few weeks later as their first single. So yeah, it's nice that they opened up with something you knew, and then they saved the new stuff for the end. But even for being new stuff, it's again, it's a great band at the height. Like this is, I guess, the second wave of the Grateful Dead's career, kind of wave number. They're like at the height of where they're at during this period.
Yeah, I've never been a Dead fan, but I can appreciate how good they are, especially at this moment in time. So yeah, I do enjoy all three of these performances by them.
Yeah. I was really happy when they started into Good Lovin'. I was like, oh, this is fun. Like,
they went right into it. Yeah. I mean, this is a long perform. It feels super long, not in a bad way, of course, but just like, yeah, they do two full numbers.
I'm pretty sure that's what they're known for, right? They just keep playing.
I mean, easily one of the best appearances of a musical guest we've seen so far.
I'd agree.
Well, from there we're going to our last sketch of the night, and it is a big sketch with a lot of people in it.
This is not your typical last sketch of the night. No way.
It was surprising to me.
Yeah.
We're at St. Mickey's Knights of Columbus, and we got Dan and John on the dais. They're playing the Knights of Columbus, thanking the ladies in the kitchen. I thought was funny. Like this whole sketch to me just felt like, oh, this is very like 60s, 70s, suburban Knights of Columbus type thing. I thought everybody was good when they came up and they just did their parts. Like John plays the new, I forget what his title is, president or whatever of the club, and Dan's the treasurer, and Buck comes on as a priest and thanks them. And then we get our first occurrence of Garrett as Chico Escueda.
And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our much-awaited guest speaker. A former Major League All-Star, a peppery, hard-hitting second baseman, and shortstop for the Chicago Cubs for so many years. He was a great one. From Santo Domingo, little number 14, Chico Escuela. Chico!
Thank you very much. Baseball being very, very good to me. Thank you. God bless you. Gracias.
Is that it, Chico?
No. Keep your eye on the ball.
I thought this was a long last sketch of the night.
Yes.
But I enjoyed it because everyone got these, it was kind of like everyone up at the dais just taking turns talking. And I thought they were all really good.
But it worked. Like it wasn't like you see these kind of sketches where it's very obviously a parade of people to come through. But this structurally worked for all these people to be involved and have their moment. Totally.
Yeah. Because it was very, very much like a banquet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really the Chico part is obviously the most exciting part for SNL fans because we know where he's going to go from here. I love that they mentioned that he played for the Cubs. The whole part was that he played for the Mets all those years when he went on Weekend Update. But even Dan, talking about the finances, and he's like, we're down, I don't know, $1,100. Most of that's because of the speakers.
Yeah, his $900 speaking fee. Yeah,
$900.
Which at the time you're wondering, okay, where does this go? Like, what's the point? And then Chico gets up to speak, and he has 2 lines.
He has 2 lines. Yeah, is that all you're going to say, Chico?
John doesn't know what to do. He's like, very inspiring. Thank you.
Yeah.
So this sketch was actually created by Brian Dole Murray, who's from Chicago, and created the sketch and the character Chico Escuela. And then it's, as we'll talk about, I'm sure, down the road, but Alan Zweibel really liked this character and had the idea of going to Brian. Let's put him on Update. So, but it's interesting. Like you say, yeah, we should point out he originally was a Cubs player.
I actually rewound it to make sure that I heard that
you
right.
Heard it right? Yeah.
When he said, yeah, I was like, wait, what? Cubs? Yeah.
When I knew that Brian Dole Murray this was his sketch, and it was like, oh, it makes total sense. Yes, it's a Chicago thing, of course.
But everybody's really good in this. Yeah, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I liked Bill. I thought Bill, of course, was great as the smart-ass kid who wins the trophy. Awesome. He's like, do you have anything to say? And he quotes Chico's one line. Because he knows he's pissing his dad off. And
I thought that was great. And I thought that interaction between John and Bill was good too. Cause John's like, calls him a smart ass or whatever. Yeah. It was fun.
And for being, like you said, it's the last sketch of the night. Everybody's in it. Everybody's given their all. It's, again, my like energy argument. I feel like everybody's to the very bitter end is given 100%. And that's just why I had this like I don't know. I love this episode because I feel like you just get that vibe the whole time.
And everybody gets a lot of good laugh lines, but I think Buck really has to end it. And it's not really that funny what he's talking about. But again, Buck being Buck, he kind of carries it when he tells that story about the kid dying in the car because of carbon monoxide and wonders if he got a final Hail Mary in before he...
Yeah, it was fun. It was a great last sketch of the night, I think.
Yes.
And that's it. Then we get good nights. Buck thanks the Grateful Dead. Not something that we see all of the time in this era.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That stuck out to me. That's our show. I think it's more fun after talking to you two about it. So thank you than I did in my initial viewing. And a big part of it was Buck. Like it was just a great Buck show.
Yes.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I mean, we talked about Buck on our host countdown on the SNN over the summer, and it's almost indescribable what he brings to a show because there's not really anybody else like him that comes into the show and is able to do what he does. He elevates some mediocre sketches, and he really, really elevates the really good sketches. So I don't know that we've ever seen anybody like Buck before or since.
I agree. I think this episode specifically is a great example of that, Bill. I'd put this as one of, if not Buck's best episodes that he's hosted. This is easily the best of the season we've seen so far. I know it's a young season. We're only 5 episodes in. I don't know. I love this episode. I think this is a great episode. I know I said it repeatedly, but there was just this energy that I felt about it. That, like everybody was on their game. And like you mentioned, Gary, the audience, I didn't realize it before, but after hearing you talk about it too, like the audience, I think helped bring that energy because they're just so amped and they're so into it. And say, unlike the Stones where they didn't deliver, or maybe they weren't as open to the comedy for whatever reason, everything just clicked. And so they were into everything, including like when they show John for the optometrist sketch and like the place just goes nuts.
Yeah. The audience, I'm a big believer in the audience brings that energy.
You're right.
And this audience was on point this week.
Right.
They were totally into it. There were no pre-tapes this week. And I think sometimes we lose audience momentum when there's a pre-tape or even sometimes of the pre-commercials.
Or too many. Yeah. Like if you get 2 or 3 for some reason, like a short film and a commercial or whatever. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it kept the energy in the studio the whole time. And they're not looking at monitors for jokes or anything. Except for the Chiron crawl, but it worked.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you weren't missing Gary Weiss?
I miss Gary Weiss every day, Bill.
He's not dead.
But I don't see his films every day.
He's not dead. He just doesn't answer our emails, but he's alive.
Well, solid episode, I think, top to bottom. Buck brought it. Buck was a great host.
Buck. Nice recovery.
Thank
Keep
you.
going.
Yeah. Bill, what were your best bits?
Well, I think I've got to go with Samurai, of course. This is a staple of any Buck episode, and I think even this far into the run of Samurai, it was very, very good. And I'm going to also say Uncle Roy. Sorry, I know that, again, as we've talked about, it doesn't age well. But I think to see them take a risk like this is something that I really enjoy because comedy should be about risk sometimes. So I'm gonna put both of those up as best bits.
All right, Brad, what are your best bits?
I'm going to defer to you, Gary.
Oh, hunting. All right. I also had Samurai Optometrist and the monologue. I thought this monologue was excellent. It's probably one of my favorite monologues we've seen so far. So those were my 2 best bits.
Thank you both. So the reason I wanted to let you go, Gary, is as much as I've like raved and talked about how much I loved this episode, I actually had a hard time figuring out best bits because I thought like everything was like very, very good, but nothing like stood out as amazing. So I was having trouble. Basically, I had the monologue and Uncle Roy were up there, and I want to say Casey Jones. I think that performance by the Dead is just, it's one of the most singularly great performances that we've seen of this era, and I think it had to go up there.
You know, I didn't think of this until now, but I think part of that, a big part of that, and this performance from the Dead, you saying, Brad, one of the best we've seen of anyone on the show to date, was like, this is a band, this is a live performing band. Like, they're not a studio band that's like heavily produced or anything, right? Like, this is a band that thrives performing live, and you can see it in these performances tonight.
Yeah, they just care about playing. I was reading about the performance where they were doing the sound check or the technical rehearsal, for the show. And Davey Wilson's talking to them over the monitor about like, where are you going to stand for this or for that? And like for Jerry Garcia, like, where are you going to be for your solo? And Jerry Garcia's like, I don't know, wherever. He goes, well, don't you want to be on camera? He's like, no, I don't give a shit. And he's like, what? So it's like, yeah, like they're all about the music and putting it out there.
Yeah, it was awesome. Well, Bill, thank you for joining us. This was great.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's I've been waiting for this for a long time. Love being on with you guys.
It's a breath of fresh air to not have to put up with John Schneider on these Buck episodes. So thank you. Oh, I kid. I'm kidding.
Yes.
But no, it was great having you. This was great.
Yes,
Thank you.
I'm so happy to finally get you on.
Yeah, I'm excited. I was excited to be here, and this was fun. I spend a lot of time on roundtables on the SNN and looking at current episodes. So to go back and go through the minutia of the original era was so much fun, and love always talking to you guys.
Yeah. You want to tell our audience where they can find you?
Yeah, a lot of the time over at the Saturday Night Network, either on a hot take show or roundtable, depending on the week. And I'm also going to be on the SNL Hall of Fame starting in January as the new host. Talk about replacing a legend, Thomas Senna, who has carried the torch over there.
Okay, he's not here. He's not.
A legend, in Brad's mind.
Oh, Jesus.
and you both will hopefully be joining me. Brad will be joining me for my very first hosting gig over there. So,
ooh, that's a risk there, Bill.
Yeah,
that's like
you should have talked to your producers about that one.
Yeah, starting out with a show that you have to carry is probably not the best thing.
Yeah. Who canceled on you guys?
Well, Bill, thank you. This was awesome having you. Really appreciate it.
You.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Next week, we're launching another new show.
Yet another.
More and more. Is this the last one?
Gotta be. Well, see how it goes. Maybe.
Yeah, let's see.
Probably.
We are debuting My SNL Story, which is us having conversations with folks who worked on SNL. And our first guest is Mitchell Lawrence.
A name you might not remember or might not know, but he's going to have some amazing stories. Worked on the show seasons 1 through 5. His brother went on to be a featured player later on, but we're talking to Mitchell. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're excited to kick things off with him.
All right, that's next week. Until then, good night and have a pleasant tomorrow.
And have a pleasant tomorrow.
Thanks for listening to the Not Ready for Primetime Project. If you're enjoying what you're hearing, please take a moment to rate and review the project wherever you find us. You can find us on social media everywhere at NR4PT Project. Thanks again for listening. Have a pleasant tomorrow.
Is that it, Chico?